All right, so we got some pretty big allegations that have come out of a new book that was written by this guy, Bob Woodward. I'm sure most of you guys have heard his name before. He has written many books throughout the Trump years and has been a very big establishment writer, I guess, throughout the Trump administration. And so we have some pretty big explosive news coming out of one of the more recent books. And again, this is a book. This guy is trying to sell this book, and obviously, headlines like this or leaks parts of the books like this could be used as an attempt to try to sell more of those books. So, whether or not the information in this is 100% accurate is, I'll leave that up to you guys to determine how much of this you want to believe. But, he is a relatively credible source, I'll say that. And so General Milley, apparently, according to this new book, feared that Trump might launch a nuclear attack and made secret calls to China. So the big thing that conservatives have been focusing on in the wake of this new revelation is basically that General Mark Milley, who is the main four-star general within the Trump administration, basically committed an act of treason, or at least that is how they're framing this. And so I wanted to bring this to you guys to look through exactly what was said, who he was calling, what was the context of it, and was it treasonous? Was it crazy? Was it justified? And so let's go ahead and read some of the details here. So, in the aftermath of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley, then former President Donald Trump's top military advisor, took precautions to limit Trump's ability to launch a military strike or deploy nuclear weapons, according to a new book by Bob Woodward and Robert Costa of the Washington Post. So, again, just to give you context, we're talking about in the days after January 6th, right? In the days after Donald Trump incited a fascist insurrection to try to overturn the results of a legitimate election in which Donald Trump lost. So obviously a very tense moment, to say the least. And so, let's get into the actual actions that were taken by General Mark Milley. Okay, so far nothing too crazy, but in Peril, which is what the book is called, Woodward and Costa write that Milley was afraid that Trump had constructed his own alternate reality about endless election conspiracies. Okay, so this part of it is just 100% correct. Okay, Donald Trump was out and freaking out in public, talking about, he still to this day is freaking out in public about election conspiracies that have absolutely no basis in reality. So that part so far is just 100% accurate recounting of reality. So Milley told senior staff that, quote, "You never know what a president's trigger point is," according to CNN. And in a rare move, the outlet reported that Milley called a secret meeting of senior military officials at the Pentagon on January 8th, 2 days after January 6th, the riots, to review the process for military action, including launching nuclear weapons. He instructed those in charge of the National Military Command Center, the Pentagon's war room, not to take orders from anyone without his involvement. Okay, so now this is getting a little bit spicy, right? Because you have a general who is the top advisor militarily to the president of the United States, who is supposed to be the commander-in-chief, right? The head of the military, theoretically, right? In this country, we are supposed to have a civilian control of the military, which means that under a democratic system, obviously we're not a pure democracy in any sense of the word, but theoretically, under our current constitutional system, you are supposed to have a democratic control via the presidency, who is elected to that position, being the top commander within the military and therefore having civilian control of the military. So if military commanders are unilaterally taking actions to undercut the president, that could arguably be treasonous. So let's continue and actually see some of the details here. So according to CNN, he told officials, quote, "No matter what you are told, you do the procedure, you do the process, and I'm part of that procedure." Milley then looked each officer in the eye and asked them to verbally confirm that they understood his instructions. Okay, this is very dramatic, but okay, look at what he actually just said there. No matter what you are told, you do the procedure, you do the process, and I'm part of that procedure. So listen, I'm not like an expert on the military chain of command in terms of launching nuclear strikes or anything like that, but just looking from an outsider's perspective and seeing what should be the case, right, under a functioning system, should we have a system in which a president like Donald Trump or any president, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, should any of these presidents have the ability to unilaterally launch a nuclear strike against another country who is not imminently attacking us? No, okay, that's fucking crazy. That's fucking insane. Obviously, a president, even though they are democratically elected, should not have the ability to unilaterally launch a nuclear strike. And so, while I'm not an expert on the actual process for launching a nuclear strike, I do think that having some sort of checks and balances within that system would make a lot of sense. And it doesn't seem like at least within this quote that he was giving there, that he was saying anything out of the ordinary, right? He's just saying follow the procedure, follow the typical chain of command, and if Donald Trump is trying to launch some sort of crazy last-minute attempt to stay in power nuclear strike, then make sure you're following through the chain of command and that we are not just going by whatever the whims are of this insane president that is currently in office. So they continue saying that Milley's actions were prompted, and if you remember this, which I do remember this, Nancy Pelosi coming out and basically trying to undercut some of Trump's power after January 6th, but Milley's actions were prompted by a phone call with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi from California earlier that day, and according to the Washington Post, Pelosi demanded to know, quote, what precautions are available to prevent an unstable president from initiating military hostilities or from accessing the launch codes and ordering a nuclear strike. So this seems to me, right, I'm not a big fan of Nancy Pelosi, obviously, but this seems to me like she's obviously undercutting the president's ability to do these things because she's saying, listen, do we have the ability to take Trump's nuclear codes away from him? I mean, she's pretty much just literally saying that. And if General Mark Milley were to turn around and say, yes, I'm trying to withhold or blockade Trump's ability to have access to these nuclear codes, is that treasonous? It's kind of borderline, right? I mean, it literally is. But given the context, again, we're talking about on the eve of January 6th, or we're talking about in the lead up to January 6th and just after January 6th and those riots that had occurred. So there was a lot of instability and there was a lot of questions of like, is this a coup that's happening right now? Is Donald Trump trying to remain in power? Obviously, he was trying, albeit very incompetently. So, it is kind of unstable. So you have the Speaker of the House, who is the third ranking member who is basically in line for the presidency under this situation. You have the president, the vice president, the Speaker of the House. So you have the Speaker of the House basically coordinating behind the scenes with the top general, who's the top military advisor to the president, and they are coordinating behind the scenes to basically undercut Trump's power in the final days of his presidency and say, listen, we just had basically what was effectively a very incompetently, you could say, like, attempted coup attempt, right? And so you have the Speaker of the House and one of these top generals who are coordinating behind the scenes to undercut the power of the president. So that's the current situation according to so far what we know. And they continue saying, quote, this is what Nancy Pelosi had to say, he's crazy, you know he's crazy, and what he did yesterday, talking about January 6th, is further evidence of his craziness, she said, according to the Post. And Milley replied, I agree with you on everything. And so Milley's decision to place himself between Trump and sanctioned military actions mirrored those of James R. Schlesinger, the Secretary of Defense under President Richard Nixon, who in August of 1974 instructed military officials to alert him and the chain of the Joint Chiefs of Staff before carrying out orders from Nixon, who was facing an impeachment at the time. So it seems like we've had this type of thing happen before, relatively, right? Where you'll have like high-ranking members within the U.S. Congress coordinating behind the scenes with members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or other people in order to check a president who is obviously volatile and subject to launch some crazy military attack in order to try to get keep himself in power, at least. And so here's the other interesting part of this. So Milley also reassured Chinese General Li Zhucheng, and I'm sure I butchered that name, but the Chinese general, his equivalent, basically, Mark Milley, within the Chinese government of the People's Liberation Army, and he called them saying that the U.S. had no intention of launching a strike against China, according to the paper, and it was one of two secret phone calls shared with Li on the issue, and the first took place on August 30th, 2020, after Milley reviewed intelligence suggesting that China believed the U.S. was preparing for an attack due to military exercises in the South China Sea and Trump's antagonism toward the country, according to the Post. But Milley told Li that he would be warned of an impending attack, saying, quote, General Li, you and I have known each other for 5 years now. He said, according to the paper, if we're going to attack, I'm going to call you ahead of time. It's not going to be a surprise. And so you have basically a top general within the U.S. military calling one of what you could colloquially say are top adversaries, right? Even though I don't think that China should be known as an adversary, especially militarily. We should be avoiding war with China at every cost possible, right? It would be absolutely disastrous and something we should avoid. But you have a top military general who is calling China under or basically behind the back of the president of the United States and saying, listen, don't worry, these military exercises, they're nothing. You don't have anything to worry about. We're not going to attack you. And even if President Donald Trump, although he didn't necessarily say this, but the implication is, even though we have a very volatile situation here happening domestically, we are likely not going to be attacking you or attacking China in this way. And so he continues saying, But the events of January 6th renewed the general's concern from China. And on January 8th, Milley once again assured the Chinese general, quote, "We are 100% steady, everything's fine, but democracy can be sloppy sometimes," he told him, according to the Post. And the same day, the paper reported Milley contacted the admiral overseeing the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and told him to basically postpone military exercises that they were doing in the South China Sea. And they continue saying, quote, "In a statement Tuesday, Trump responded to the book's revelations by calling Milley, quote, a failed leader who engineered one of the worst withdrawal from a country in U.S. history," obviously talking about the Afghanistan withdrawal. "And if the story is true," Trump said, "then I assume Milley would be tried for treason, in that he would have been dealing with his Chinese counterpart behind the president's back and telling China that he would be giving them a notification of an attack." Can't do that. Okay, so that's Donald Trump's take on all of this. And listen, what is my take on all of this? Well, it seems like it's very, at least evident that we have basically a top general within the U.S. military, a Speaker of the House that are coordinating behind the president's back after basically what was essentially an attempted insurrection on January 6th. And they're coordinating behind the president's back to try to keep him in check and say, listen, if Donald Trump is going to launch some crazy nuclear strike, or he's going to try to get involved in some military altercation in order to try to keep himself in power as the president, then we have to prevent that from happening, right? And so is that a reasonable thing? Maybe, given the context. Is it treasonous? Maybe also. I mean, it may also be treasonous, but it may also be reasonable treasonous actions that were taken by these people. So I'll leave it up to you guys to decide, right? Is this fitting under the definition of treason for the Speaker of the House and one of the top military generals to be undercutting the ability for the commander-in-chief to conduct military actions? Maybe it's treasonous. Maybe it's also reasonable. But maybe on top of that, we shouldn't have a system that allows a president to unilaterally conduct a nuclear strike or otherwise military strike against other countries without approval from Congress. Maybe we should actually go back to what the Constitution initially stated was the role of the presidency, and not waging unilateral wars against countries that haven't attacked us, right? The only situation, in my mind at least, in which a president should be able to strike another country should be if there is an imminent attack, right? If you are going to launch a nuclear weapon against another country, it should only be when that country has already launched a nuclear weapon towards the United States, right? That's the only foreseeable possible situation in which I could see it would be defensive in nature and therefore be somewhat justifiable, even though nuclear weapons should not be used under any circumstances at all, because they basically eviscerate civilian populations, and they are disgusting and horrific, as we saw from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, obviously, as the United States was one of the only countries in history to drop a bomb of this sort of power.